And don't forget that Judd Gregg had a brief flirtation with joining the Obama administration. I don't think he's going to do that now. But he wants some kind of orderly structure here. What McConnell is arguing, Rachel, is akin to what you might argue, in the old days against having the Corps of Engineers build dams upstream from, say, Louisville, Kentucky, where Mitch McConnell lives. Mitch is saying, no, you don't want to build the dams because you're only going to have a flood every 30 years. Well, Louisville will be flooded every 30 years.
Right. That's
sort of what Barack Obama and the Democrats are proposing here, what McConnell is going to try to fight. I'm not sure he's going to be able to get it done this time.
And with your flood analogy, he would probably have a lot more luck with that analogy had we not just all finished drying out our basements, or maybe half of us finished drying out our basements from the giant flood. Howard Fineman of MSNBC and Newsweek, it's always great to have you here. Howard, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel.
Senator Chuck Grassley was determined that any health reform bill passed by Congress would apply to members of Congress and their staff. None of this, it's okay for you, but not for me stuff. So Senator Grassley last September drafted a provision in the health reform bill that meant to keep members of Congress and thousands of congressional staffers on reformed health care. That'll show them commies. Only problem, what the provision actually did was ban members of Congress and their staff members from having any health insurance at all. Oops. Senator Grassley admits to drafting the original language, but he tells the New York Times now that other people must have redrafted what he wrote, and those unnamed redrafters must have made this mistake. The good news, Senator Grassley says he wants the problem fixed. We wouldn't want anyone to go without health insurance now, would we? That would be barbaric.
I don't want another Oklahoma City to ever take place again. And just as we would not give aid and comfort to al-Qaeda, let us not allow the words of elected leaders to give comfort and comfortable excuses to extremists bent on violence. When members of Congress compare health care legislation to government tyranny, socialism, or totalitarianism in the hopes of scoring political points, it's like pouring gas on the fire of extremism.
That was Congresswoman Betty McCollum of Minnesota speaking on the House floor this week in support of a resolution honoring the victims of the 1995 attack on the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The resolution passed. Monday, of course, is the 15th anniversary of the bombing, which killed 168 Americans. On Friday, Bill Clinton will be the keynote speaker at a symposium marking the anniversary. It's an event designed to be a forum for discussing how the country reacted to the attack 15 years ago and what lessons learned from the Oklahoma City bombing can be applied to today's America. On Monday, our next guest, Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano, will be in Oklahoma City itself for the official remembrance ceremony. Also that day, again, on the anniversary of the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City by Timothy McVeigh, an anti-government extremist with ties to the militia movement, there will be two marches on Washington. One's being called the Second Amendment March. It's leading up to their march on Washington. This group has been holding armed rallies at state capitals from Kentucky to Montana to Virginia, anti-government marches and rallies at which participants are encouraged to wear and display their guns. Now, even though those folks have been armed at all the state capitals leading up to the April 19th march, when they actually head to the grounds of the Washington Monument on the actual anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, they are not allowed to open carry there. So that Second Amendment march will be unarmed in D.C. That said, right across the Potomac from that site at Gravely Point Park in Virginia, that march on D.C., also on the occasion of the Oklahoma City bombing anniversary, that march will be armed. Participants at that one are being encouraged to bring guns. The organizers are holding it in Virginia and bringing people right up to Gravely Point on the Potomac because they say that's as close as they think they can legally get to D.C. with loaded weapons. One of the speakers at that event is the one with guns, is the ex-Alabama militiaman who made news recently by encouraging people to go to Democratic Party offices and throw bricks through the windows. One other high-profile attendee of that armed march is backing out now. He's the president of the Oath Keepers. They're a group of pro-gun law enforcement and military personnel who say they plan to disobey orders in order to, in their words, prevent possible future egregious violations of the Bill of Rights and to, again, in their words, stop a dictatorship from taking root in America. The Oath Keepers has pulled out of the armed march on almost Washington, citing published statements comments by some participants in the upcoming rally that indicate that the event will have a confrontational stance. Joining us now for the interview, I've been very much looking forward to this discussion, is Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
As a U.S. attorney in Arizona at the time, 15 years ago, I know that you were part of the investigation into the Oklahoma City bombing. You'll be participating in the commemoration on Monday. Do you feel like we approach the threat of domestic terrorism differently now as a country than we did before that incident?
Well, yes, in part because every time there is an incident, and it's hard to describe something as horrific as the bombing of the Maddow building as an incident. It was an outrageous criminal act. But every time one of those things happens, we learn. We apply that in a law enforcement way to the next set of events. So, yes, experience does teach us some things. And unfortunately, the Maddow building bombing taught us a lot.
In terms of that, and I know that I'm raising a report for which there was a lot of political heat. Your department got some heat last year when you put out a report that said the current economic and political climate has some similarities to the 90s when right-wing extremism experienced a resurgence. In terms of that report, in terms of your government's advice and support to local law enforcement, how do you advise them, and how does the country dealing with the threat of domestic extremism now?
Well, what we do is we work with law enforcement to give them information about threats that we are seeing, information about trends that we are discerning, so that they are better prepared to protect public safety on the ground. And we, in turn, receive information back from local law enforcement. And so, we will provide information. For example, we had a recent case where individuals were buying large amounts of hydrogen peroxide to make explosives. It got into the news. Well, you advise local law enforcement to watch for unusual purchases of hydrogen peroxide. That's the kind of direct tactical information that we want to get into the hands of law enforcement.
What were some of the things that law enforcement did with some of the more extremist militia groups and other domestic terrorist organizations, as you defined them in the report last year? What were some of the things that law enforcement did right to essentially stem the growth of those groups after Oklahoma City?
Well, I think in a way, Oklahoma City was such an outrageous criminal act that in and of itself it had an effect on the growth of militia movements, of armed, violent militia movements. And so we did see almost an immediate drop-off after 1995. And, we've had militia groups, armed militia groups, from time to time throughout American history, and indeed throughout the last decades. They seem to kind of come in and come out as circumstances change. But prior to 1995, the Maddow building bombing, they were really a rapidly growing phenomenon throughout the United States, particularly in some areas of the states like Arizona, where I was the United States attorney. Then they seem to have dissipated. And now, of course, recent events show us that we have some groups starting up again.
Considering the threat of terror from abroad and Department of Homeland Security's role in international counterterrorism, I know that you're just back from Nigeria, the home country of the attempted Christmas Day bomber. I know you were there to meet with leaders of a whole host of African countries about boosting the international side of airline security. What was accomplished there? What are leaders agreeing to try to fill some of those gaps?
Really, it's an amazing global response to the attempted bombing on Christmas Day, where region by region around the world we are forging a consensus about information collection, information sharing, passenger vetting, and improved security at airports. I think people already will have seen some of the things going into place in airports in the United States. It's objectively better technology for discerning someone who may be trying to bring explosives or other material onto an airplane. But we're seeing the same kind of response internationally, and it was particularly encouraging to see it amongst the Union of African Nations over this past weekend.
I was thinking about preparing for this interview, this chance to talk to you today, and is trying to narrow down all the things that are in your purview as Secretary of Homeland Security.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Exactly. I mean, there's something like 200,000 employees in this agency, 22 agencies all brought under one. Everything from, FEMA and airline security and H1N1 and drugs and immigration and all of these different things. I don't know that you can actually answer this and still be politic, but does the Department of Homeland Security make sense that it's one thing?